I am so glad to have you here. Welcome back to the channel. Follow my story until the very end and let me know in the comments which city you are watching this video from. I will never forget the expression on my son, Alex's face, when I pronounced those exact words that would change our lives forever. Explain to your wife why the monthly allowance of $10,000 you receive is going to vanish in the next 5 minutes. His face went as pale as if he had just seen a ghost. Brittany's champagne glass slipped and crashed to the floor, spilling the crimson liquid all over the spotless white tablecloth. The guests were completely paralyzed, creating a silence so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. But this story did not begin on that day. To truly understand how we reached that massive turning point, I need to take you 6 months back. Back to when I was simply Victoria, the humble and grateful mother who lived off the charity of her highly successful son. My name is Victoria Carter. I am 64 years old, and for the majority of my adult life, I have kept a massive secret that not even my own son knew about. I am the sole owner of a real estate empire, valued at over $15 million. Every single morning I would wake up at 6 o'clock in my tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, a working-class borough of New York City. The morning ritual was always exactly the same. I would brew coffee in an old stovetop espresso maker. I would sit down in my heavily worn-out armchair and read the daily newspaper, all while listening to the news on an antique radio I had bought at a local flea market. My apartment was deliberately modest. It had cream-colored walls that desperately needed a fresh coat of paint, second-hand furniture I had picked up at thrift stores, and very basic appliances that worked perfectly fine but clearly showed the heavy wear and tear of many years of use. The refrigerator door was completely covered in family photographs. In them, I was always shown smiling, right next to Alex and Brittany, flawlessly playing the part of the perfect grandmother who unconditionally adored her family. Those pictures physically hurt me every single time I looked at them because they displayed a fake happiness that simply did not exist in reality anymore. While I was busy playing this exhausting role of an elderly woman with extremely limited resources, my actual home remained completely hidden. It was a magnificent 3,000-square-foot penthouse right on Park Avenue, the financial beating heart of Manhattan, featuring breathtaking panoramic views that stretched all the way from Central Park down to the downtown skyline. Only my highly trusted lawyer, Marcus Vance, and my personal assistant, Chloe, knew about this hidden side of my life. My final decision to live a double life actually began 15 years ago. Before the tragic death of my husband, Anthony, we had worked together to build a highly prosperous construction and real estate investment business called Carter Construction. When he suddenly passed away from a massive heart attack, I was left entirely in charge of everything. At that time, Alex was only 27 years old and had just recently married Brittany. I can still clearly remember that gloomy afternoon in the lawyer's office when the final will was read out loud. Alex fully expected to inherit total and complete control of the company, but Anthony had been much wiser than that. He left 80% of the company's shares directly to me and the remaining 20% to Alex, but with one very specific clause attached. I would be the one to decide exactly when and how to transfer full control over to him whenever I truly felt he was mentally ready for the immense responsibility. The bitter disappointment on my son's face was painfully obvious, but what truly shattered my heart into a million pieces was overhearing his private conversation with Brittany out in the hallway, right when they foolishly believed no one else could hear them. "Do not worry about it," Brittany told him in a hushed tone. "Your mother is already 49 years old. How much longer can she possibly keep running a whole company? In a couple of years, she will be way too exhausted and will hand the control right over to you. Or we can simply convince her that she is no longer mentally capable of doing it." Those awful words absolutely made my blood run cold. It was not even so much for their sheer cruelty, but mainly because they made me completely realize that I did not actually know my own son or the horrible woman he had chosen to marry. They were totally capable of manipulating me just for the money. They viewed me simply as an annoying obstacle standing in the way of their selfish ambitions. That very night, after many long hours of deep reflection, I made a firm decision that would ultimately change all of our lives forever. I was absolutely not going to hand over the control of the company directly to them. Instead, I would carefully create a test. It would be a foolproof way to discover their true, authentic characters without massive amounts of money interfering with their personal decisions. I contacted Marcus Vance the very next day, and working closely together, we developed a highly meticulous plan. We completely restructured the entire business using various shell companies and anonymous blind trusts. On paper, I officially handed over the main leadership to a board of private investors, who in reality were operating strictly under my direct instructions. Alex was handed a comfortable executive position with a very handsome salary, falsely believing he was actively earning the respect of these high-level investors. To fully complete this grand illusion, I signed a lease on that tiny apartment in Queens and began living a highly modest life in the public eye. I was carefully keeping my true luxurious residence and lavish lifestyle a closely guarded secret. I lied and told them that I had simply decided to retire quietly and live off a small government pension. This let them foolishly believe that the family company was now entirely in the hands of third-party strangers. My son Alex was now 42 years old, and he perfectly played the part of the incredibly successful man he had always dreamed of becoming. Standing tall with perfectly styled dark hair, he always wore wildly expensive tailored suits paired with luxury Swiss watches that easily cost more than the average person's entire annual salary. He drove a sleek silver Mercedes-Benz, lived in a sprawling mansion located in an exclusive gated community in Westchester, and constantly bragged about being the brilliant director of Carter Construction, a company he supposedly led to massive success through his own sheer intelligence and unmatched determination. Brittany, my 38-year-old daughter-in-law, was the absolute textbook definition of a spoiled trophy wife. She was a platinum blonde with heavy hair extensions reaching all the way down to her waist. She had flawless acrylic nails and a massive collection of designer dresses that completely changed with every passing season. Her lips were permanently swollen from endless Botox injections, and her eyebrows were perfectly shaped with microblading. She absolutely never left the house without wearing a heavy layer of makeup that took her well over an hour to painstakingly apply. She drove a bright red Mercedes-Benz that Alex had generously gifted her for her birthday. She lazily spent her days bouncing between the high-end spa and exclusive private gym and the wildly expensive luxury boutiques on Fifth Avenue. Brittany's parents, Edward and Frances Miller, actually lived right there with them in the massive mansion. Edward, a 65-year-old man, had taken a very early retirement thanks to the immense supposed generosity of Alex. Alex had previously secured him a highly paid fake job at the construction firm. Frances, who was 62 years old, happily took charge of managing the mansion's lavish gardens and enthusiastically cooked large meals for the entire household. Both of them constantly treated Alex as if he were the grand savior of their entire family. He was the absolutely perfect son-in-law who had bravely rescued their precious daughter from a miserable life of pure mediocrity. Every single Sunday, almost religiously, I would visit the giant mansion for our traditional family lunch. I would arrive in my tiny beat-up white car from 2010. It constantly made strange rattling noises as it struggled to climb the steep, winding roads leading up into the exclusive Westchester Hills. I always brought along a warm, homemade dessert, lovingly prepared with my very own hands. Rich chocolate cakes, sweet coconut custards, or simple oatmeal cookies. My humble gifts were always received with tight, forced smiles and incredibly condescending comments. "Oh, you really should not have bothered," or "How sweet, you are always so thoughtful." The toxic family dynamic became perfectly clear the very second I stepped foot through their grand front door. I was treated strictly as a second-class guest. I was the pathetic poor grandmother who heavily depended on the sheer kindness of her wildly successful son. They would deliberately sit me in the absolute least comfortable chair in the massive dining room. They served my food on the oldest, most chipped plates. My personal opinions were completely ignored or quickly dismissed with awkward, nervous laughter. Brittany always managed to find extremely subtle, nasty ways to clearly remind me of my lowly place within their strict family hierarchy. "Victoria, how exactly are you managing your household expenses?" she would ask me with completely fake concern right as she casually sliced into her expensive imported steak. "I really hope that the $500 Alex generously sends you every single month is enough to get by. We all know it can be quite difficult to properly manage money at your advanced age." Her cruel comments always came paired with a tight little smile that absolutely never reached her cold eyes. It was the exact expression she always used whenever she desperately wanted to make me feel tiny and overly grateful. Alex, for his part, had fully developed the disgusting habit of talking down to me. He treated me as if I were a clueless little girl who constantly needed extremely simple explanations just to understand how the real world worked. "Mom, you really have to understand that maintaining a massive house like this costs a tremendous amount of money. The property taxes alone are $20,000 a year, not to even mention the general maintenance, the utility bills, and feeding 5 hungry people. We honestly make a huge financial effort to help you out with that $500 a month. But sometimes it is incredibly difficult to perfectly balance our own pressing needs with yours." What truly broke my heart the most was slowly watching how they had carefully constructed this completely fake, perfect narrative. In their twisted minds, they were the heroic, generous saviors, and I was just the pathetic, highly grateful beneficiary. Derek Mitchell, who was Alex's supposed business partner, frequently visited the large house to openly discuss corporate business. They would always loudly introduce me to him. "This is Alex's sweet mother, who lives on a very tiny pension, but we happily help her out financially because family is the most important thing." Derek was a 45-year-old man completely bald with a rather prominent beer belly that he constantly tried to hide by wearing ridiculously expensive tailored vests. He had a very specific way of speaking that clearly betrayed his much more humble origins. However, he desperately managed to project a fake image of high sophistication that ended up looking way more comical than actually convincing. He always spoke to me with that very special sickening brand of condescension strictly reserved for the elderly. "Miss Victoria, what an absolute pleasure it is to see you today. Alex is always telling us just how incredibly proud he is to be able to financially take care of you in your old age." My quiet Sundays had fully turned into a dark ritual of subtle yet extremely constant personal humiliation. Right after lunch, while the men smugly retreated into the private study to discuss important business over wildly expensive bottles of imported whiskey, Brittany would literally drag me into the large kitchen. This was always under the completely false pretense of having me help out with the dirty dishes. It was right in there where she truly showed her evil nature. She finally took off the fake mask of the polite, loving daughter-in-law and flat out told me exactly what she really thought of me. "Victoria, I honestly think it is high time we speak very frankly with each other," she had coldly told me on one particularly cruel Sunday. She said this all while drying an expensive crystal wine glass with dramatically careful, slow movements. "You're getting quite old, and quite frankly, these weekly Sunday visits are rapidly becoming a massive, annoying burden for all of us. Alex works so incredibly hard all week long. Sundays are his only real day off, and having to constantly worry about entertaining you is just getting totally exhausting for him." I simply limited myself to offering a small smile and quietly nodding expertly, pretending not to fully realize her cruel, hidden intentions. but deep down inside my soul, every single nasty word, every rude gesture, and every tiny humiliation was being permanently recorded. It was solid evidence of the truly rotten character of the people surrounding me. What those absolute fools did not know was that the real Victoria had been silently observing everything. I was taking meticulous mental notes and quietly preparing the single most brilliant power play of my entire life. The following months quickly turned into a rapid downward spiral of increasingly elaborate and extremely cruel humiliations. It was as if they had suddenly decided that they no longer even needed to keep up appearances with me. Alex and Brittany began to openly show their true, unfiltered contempt without any silly pretensions. Every single Sunday magically transformed into a brand new opportunity for them to harshly remind me just how completely insignificant I was in their absolutely perfect lives. The very first major sign that something had definitively changed arrived on a freezing Sunday in February. I showed up at the sprawling mansion exactly as usual, carrying my warm, homemade carrot cake and wearing my usual hopeful smile. Brittany violently yanked the massive front door open, wearing a bright pink designer tracksuit that easily cost more than my entire monthly rent. She did not even bother to pretend that she was happy to see my face. "Oh, great, you are here." She spat out with a wildly exaggerated sigh. She acted as if my mere presence was some huge, terrible inconvenience that she had completely forgotten she would have to endure. "Let me take a wild guess." She rudely continued, glaring down at the bakery box in my trembling hands with obvious, unhidden disgust. "Another one of your silly little homemade creations. Victoria, we have literally told you 1,000 times that we employ a private personal chef. We simply do not need you dragging these things over here." The word "things" aggressively flew out of her nasty mouth as if she were accurately describing toxic radioactive waste. Besides, Frances is on a strict medical diet ordered by her doctor. Edward is a severe diabetic. I am actively watching my perfect figure, and Alex is completely avoiding all processed sugar. Literally nobody in this huge house is going to eat whatever it is you brought. But she certainly did not stop there. She aggressively marched me straight into the pristine kitchen, and right in front of my very own eyes, she tossed my freshly baked cake directly into the stainless steel trash can without even bothering to open the cardboard box. It is honestly for the best if we do not waste our precious time pretending that anyone is actually going to taste this garbage, she boldly declared. She vigorously washed her manicured hands in the sink as if she had just touched something highly contaminated. "Frankly, Victoria, I really think it is high time you finally accept that your glory days of being even remotely useful in a kitchen are completely over." Alex had also rapidly developed a brand new, highly toxic strategy to constantly prove his massive superiority. He aggressively talked about money all the time, strictly using terms that were specifically designed to make me feel like a pathetic beggar on the street. During our tense Sunday lunches, he aggressively began to openly discuss the massive household expenses. He always made sure to heavily emphasize the absolutely astronomical figures that supposedly overwhelmed his poor bank accounts. The monthly maintenance for the heated swimming pool easily costs us $1,200. He would loudly announce right as he casually sliced into his wildly expensive imported salmon. The private head gardener is another $2,000 every single month. The live-in maid is another $1,500. And that is not even mentioning the premium gas for all 3 of our luxury cars, which easily hits $800 a week. Then he would coldly stare directly into my tired eyes and cruelly add his favorite little speech. "That is exactly why, Mom, I really hope you can finally understand why we are sometimes a little bit late with your tiny monthly allowance. $500 might not seem like a whole lot of money to you, But for us, it represents a very real financial struggle when we have so many massive fixed expenses. The incredibly cruel, biting irony of his awful words pierced straight through my chest like sharp daggers. I knew perfectly well that $500 was absolutely not a small amount of money for someone supposedly scraping by on a minimum government pension. In brutal reality, that pathetic $500 was simply a meaningless, symbolic gesture. The real money, the massive $10,000 a month they happily received as base salary and lavish commissions, came straight from the hidden corporate accounts that I secretly controlled. The money was carefully funneled through several different financial institutions just to make it perfectly look like it was coming from wealthy, outside investors or massive government contracts. Brittany had absolutely perfected the dark art of complete social humiliation. She actively began inviting all her snobby friends from the exclusive tennis club over during my quiet Sunday visits. It was apparently to proudly show off her picture-perfect life, but in brutal reality, it was just to use me as a pathetic example of what they absolutely never wanted to become. Girls, please allow me to formally introduce my sweet mother-in-law, Victoria. She would loudly announce with a blindingly fake smile, right, while I was awkwardly sitting on the absolute oldest couch in the entire living room. She is just such an incredibly brave woman, is she not? She lives all alone in a very tiny, modest little house, and somehow magically manages to get by with very little money. We try our absolute best to help her out in any way we possibly can, but you ladies know exactly how it is. You simply cannot fix the whole world's massive problems for them. Her stuck-up friends, wealthy women mostly between 35 and 40 years old, all had the exact same tightly pulled faces from endless plastic surgery. They all shared the exact same rehearsed, fake laugh. They would slowly look me up and down with that horrible, toxic mixture of deep pity and massive superiority that they strictly reserved for the less fortunate. Oh my goodness, how incredibly admirable! A tall redhead with very obvious hair extensions named Samantha would loudly declare, "I simply could not survive a single day without my luxury Mercedes, my lavish European vacations, or my weekly beauty treatments. I honestly find it totally incredible how older people can just happily settle for so little in life." The intense social degradation rapidly escalated when they actually started assigning me heavy household chores during my supposedly relaxing visits. "Victoria, since you are already just sitting right here, could you please be a dear and help me thoroughly clean the large living room windows?" Brittany would sweetly ask me with pure toxic venom dripping from her words. "Frances is way too busy prepping our massive dinner. And frankly, at your very advanced age, you really need to stay highly active so you do not completely rust away." They would literally hand me a filthy old rag and a cheap bottle of toxic cleaning spray. Meanwhile, they would all comfortably sit back on the expensive leather couches, happily sipping imported cocktails and loudly laughing at all the latest gossip from the exclusive country club. But the final straw that completely broke the camel's back arrived on a rainy Sunday in March. That was when they coldly decided to completely reorganize the massive dining room table just to optimize their precious space. My usual assigned seat at the head of the main table mysteriously vanished into thin air. In its sad place, they actually dragged out a cheap, flimsy folding chair and shoved it deep into a dark, isolated corner far away from the main group. We just bought a brand new, wildly expensive dining set meant strictly for 8 people. Alex coldly explained, absolutely refusing to even look me in the eye. And your extra place setting was completely ruining the perfect symmetry of the overall interior design. From my pathetic new position in the dark corner, I could clearly hear every single word of their lively conversations, but I was completely unable to actually participate in them. It honestly felt exactly like being an invisible ghost haunting my very own family. I was physically present, but completely invisible. barely tolerated, but absolutely not welcome. They loudly talked about lavish international trips they were actively planning. They bragged about the wildly expensive exclusive restaurants they had recently visited. They obsessed over the massive diamond jewelry that Brittany desperately wanted for her upcoming birthday. Everything was always framed in terms of massive, unbelievable expenses that I, of course, could never possibly afford in a million years. We are seriously thinking about flying down to the Bahamas in April. Brittany happily announced, blindly admiring her freshly manicured acrylic nails. I actually went ahead and booked a stunning presidential suite that easily costs $5,000 a single night. But Alex firmly says that I absolutely deserve it, after all the massive stress I have had to endure lately. She would aggressively shoot me deeply meaningful, nasty glares, right when she emphasized the word stress. She acted as if my mere pathetic existence was the absolute root cause of all her terrible, overwhelming problems. Derek actively began visiting the massive house much more frequently. Their loud business conversations rapidly became increasingly exclusive and wildly elaborate. They constantly bragged about securing massive, multi-million-dollar contracts. They loudly discussed massive construction projects that would easily generate huge, six-figure profits, along with massive real estate investments that would instantly make them even richer than before. But what truly caught my sharp attention was the highly specific way they openly discussed the exact financial structure of the family company. The massive construction of the Pine Ridge residential complex is going to quickly generate a pure net profit of $2.5 million. Derek proudly declared, rapidly scrolling through endless corporate documents on his sleek tablet. The raw land itself is valued at $800,000. The actual construction phase will cost us $1,200,000, and we already have secured pre-sales totally easily hitting $4 million. It is just pure simple math. Alex confidently nodded with massive unearned authority. He acted as if he were the brilliant mastermind who had personally secured the massive initial capital for all those huge projects. What honestly makes me the absolute proudest is knowing that I literally built all of this massive success completely from scratch. He would blatantly lie through his teeth, proudly raising a heavy glass filled with $500 imported whiskey, starting out with absolutely nothing, and successfully reaching this massive peak requires incredible vision, sheer intelligence, and a hell of a lot of hard work. But the sheer cruelty rapidly reached terrifying levels that I absolutely never could have imagined. They actually began to openly discuss my bleak future as if I were completely deaf or absolutely not even present in the room. I really think Victoria is rapidly becoming way too much of a heavy burden. Brittany coldly commented one afternoon, casually retouching her heavy makeup in the massive dining room mirror. She honestly cannot even take proper care of herself anymore. And frankly, these exhausting Sunday visits are seriously damaging our perfect family life. You are absolutely right, Alex quickly responded, totally refusing to even glance up from his glowing phone screen. Besides, that crappy little apartment where she lives is rapidly falling apart. That trashy neighborhood is getting incredibly dangerous, and at her advanced age, any minor accident could be totally fatal. His cold words literally sounded exactly as if he were trying to solve an annoying logistical problem at work, not coldly discussing the bleak fate of his very own mother. It was right then and there that I secretly overheard the horrifying conversation that would alter everything forever. While I perfectly pretended to be sound asleep in my cheap folding chair, Brittany and Alex coldly began to plan out my ultimate fate, as if they were casually booking a fun summer vacation. It was the very first Sunday right after April Fool's Day, when my entire world completely collapsed. But absolutely not in the exact way that those fools had expected. That specific day, I arrived at the massive mansion exactly as usual, but something thick and heavy in the air felt completely different. It was much more incredibly tense, as if they had eagerly been waiting for my exact arrival just to execute a massive evil plan that they had been slowly brewing for months. Brittany eagerly met me right at the grand front door with a massive, terrifying smile that literally made my blood run ice cold. It was way too wide, way too perfect. Exactly like the terrifying grin of a hungry great white shark right before it attacks its helpless prey. "Victoria, I am so incredibly glad you actually got here early," she loudly exclaimed. She forcefully guided me straight toward the main living room with a wildly exaggerated fake gentleness that instantly put me on massive high alert. We have some incredibly important things to thoroughly discuss with you today. Amazing things that will absolutely change your life for the much better. We are just so incredibly excited to finally share our brilliant ideas with you. Her sickly sweet words sounded heavily rehearsed, exactly as if she had spent weeks practicing this exact speech in front of her vanity mirror. Alex was comfortably sitting in his massive Italian leather armchair wearing one of his perfectly tailored $3,000 custom suits. But for the very first time in many long months, he actually looked me directly in the eyes, right as I slowly walked into the giant room. "Mom, please come sit down right here," he gently said, pointing directly at the plush, expensive sofa directly facing him. He did not point to the cheap folding chair hidden in the dark corner where they had so cruelly banished me recently. "We really want to talk to you about something incredibly important. Something we have been carefully planning for a while now simply because we love you so much, and we deeply care about your overall well-being." My sharp intuition loudly screamed that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Over the past few awful months, the only rare times they had ever treated me with even an ounce of fake kindness was when they desperately wanted something out of me. It was usually to get me to quickly leave their house much earlier than usual or to completely cancel my upcoming Sunday visit using some pathetic, totally fabricated excuse. This sudden, overwhelming warmth was infinitely more terrifying than all of their previous cruel humiliations perfectly combined. "Victoria," Brittany slowly began. She dramatically perched herself right on the edge of Alex's leather armchair in a highly calculated, elegant pose that looked like it was ripped straight out of a luxury home decor magazine. "We have been watching you very, very carefully these past few weeks, and we have finally realized that living all by yourself is simply no longer safe for you. Your frail health is rapidly deteriorating. Your tiny, cramped apartment is literally falling to pieces. The trashy neighborhood where you live is quickly becoming incredibly dangerous. As a deeply loving and responsible family, we simply cannot allow our precious matriarch to live in such highly precarious, awful conditions." Alex nodded with massive fake gravity, acting as if they were seriously discussing a massive matter of intense national security. "Mom, you are 64 years old. At that highly advanced age, any tiny fall, any minor health scare, any sudden emergency could be totally fatal if you are all alone. What would happen if you slipped in your tiny bathroom and there was absolutely nobody around to help you? What if you suffered a massive heart attack right in the middle of the night and simply could not call for help?" His supposedly logical argument sounded somewhat reasonable right on the surface, but there was something incredibly dark and sinister hidden deep in his tone that made me feel exactly like helpless prey being rapidly cornered by starving, ruthless predators. Brittany gracefully stood up from the wide armrest and excitedly began pacing around the massive room with highly theatrical, sweeping movements. She acted exactly as if she were giving a brilliant, high-stakes corporate business presentation. "That is exactly why," she proudly announced with highly calculated, intense drama, "we have finally found the absolutely perfect solution for all of our massive problems. We have literally been researching for months. We have been touring exclusive facilities, consulting with top medical specialists, and we have finally found the absolute perfect place for you." She quickly pulled a glossy, elegant brochure filled with bright, colorful photos straight out of her expensive designer handbag. She quickly sat down right next to me on the plush sofa, leaning in so incredibly close that I could easily smell her overwhelmingly expensive designer perfume. It was heavily mixed with a strange scent that sharply reminded me of pure, raw fear. It is totally exclusive, and it is called Sunset Gardens. She excitedly declared, aggressively flipping the glossy brochure open with massive, entirely fake enthusiasm. It is an incredibly luxurious, high-end retirement community that is specifically designed for wonderful people, exactly your age. People who truly deserve to live out their golden years with massive dignity and extreme comfort. The incredibly bright photos displayed massive, sprawling facilities that honestly looked exactly like a five-star luxury resort. It featured gorgeous private rooms with stunning garden views, highly elegant dining rooms covered in crisp white tablecloths, and massive recreation rooms boasting giant flat-screen televisions. It even featured a beautiful little chapel and a massive, fully stocked library. The glossy images proudly displayed incredibly happy, smiling elderly folks playing fun card games. They were taking relaxing walks through perfectly manicured, lush gardens, actively participating in lively dance classes, and enjoying fun arts and crafts workshops. Just look at these incredible facilities. Brittany aggressively continued rapidly flipping through the glossy pages, exactly as if she were desperately trying to sell me a wildly overpriced timeshare. They have highly trained medical staff available 24 hours a day. They have incredibly skilled registered nurses, a totally private professional chef, fun daily recreational activities, full maid service, daily laundry service, and even a massive luxurious beauty salon right on the premises. Just imagine it, Victoria. You will absolutely never have to worry about cleaning your messy house, cooking meals, or struggling at the grocery store ever again. Nothing. Every single little detail will be perfectly taken care of for you. Alex eagerly leaned forward, tightly clasping his greedy hands together as if he were about to reveal the absolute greatest, most highly guarded secret in the entire world. And the absolute best part of all, Mom, is that we are going to completely pay for every single thing. The massive monthly fee is $2,500 plus plenty of additional expenses. But you will absolutely not have to worry about paying a single solitary cent. We will completely take care of absolutely everything strictly because you are our precious family, and we love you so incredibly much. I honestly felt as if the entire world had completely stopped spinning all around me. $2,500 a month was exactly 5 times more than what they supposedly gave me to survive on. If I truly lived on a pathetic $500 a month, exactly as they foolishly believed, this massive sudden generosity would represent a huge, incredibly painful financial sacrifice for them. But something highly sinister, glittering deep in their cold eyes, clearly told me that this massive plan had absolutely nothing to do with deep, filial love or genuine caring concern. When exactly would I have to move out there? I quietly asked. I was desperately trying to keep my shaking voice as completely neutral as humanly possible, while my brilliant mind furiously raced to figure out the true evil motives hiding directly behind this highly suspicious, supposedly generous proposal. Brittany and Alex quickly exchanged a fast, highly secretive look that barely lasted a single second, but it clearly told me absolutely everything I needed to know. It was a dark look of intense conspiracy mixed with massive relief. It was exactly as if they had just successfully cleared the absolute hardest, most difficult hurdle in their massive, evil master plan. Well, Brittany quickly said desperately, trying to sound totally casual and breezy, we have actually already gone ahead and made a temporary provisional reservation for next month. We honestly thought it would be absolutely perfect for you to officially move in right after Mother's Day. That way you can happily celebrate one final, incredibly special occasion with all of us, right here in the grand family home. And then you can finally start your brand new life in an environment much better suited for your massive growing needs. Mother's Day was literally in less than 3 short weeks. They were coldly handing me a massive, non-negotiable ultimatum, perfectly disguised as a beautiful, loving gift. It was a forceful family eviction carefully wrapped up in shiny wrapping paper and beautifully adorned with big fake bows of totally fake concern. But what absolutely terrified me the most was the sudden dark realization that they had probably been secretly plotting this evil scheme for many long months, or quite possibly even years. Besides, Alex quickly added in a smooth tone that desperately tried to sound comforting, but actually felt incredibly threatening to me. We have already actively spoken with a highly connected real estate agent regarding your tiny apartment. The housing market is absolutely not very good for older properties in your trashy area, but we firmly believe we could probably get around $100,000 if we forcefully push for a very quick all-cash sale. That chunk of money could easily cover almost an entire year of your highly expensive stay at Sunset Gardens. So it would truly be exactly as if your very own house were actively paying for your amazing future comfort. $100,000 for a highly modest apartment that I had quietly bought 10 years ago for well over $200,000, and that was currently worth almost $250,000 in today's booming real estate market. But to these greedy fools, an extremely fast low-ball sale of $100,000 was just a massive quick cash grab. It was a steal that would finally allow them to completely get rid of me while simultaneously looking like incredibly generous, loving children who had bravely sacrificed absolutely everything for their sweet mother's ultimate well-being. We actually have a firm appointment scheduled to go visit the massive facility this coming Wednesday. Brittany aggressively continued. She was clearly deeply thrilled that I had completely failed to offer any immediate loud resistance to her evil master plan. You can finally see the amazing facilities for yourself. You can easily chat with the other elderly residents and even check out your gorgeous new room. I am absolutely certain that you are going to absolutely love it there. People of your highly advanced age simply need to be constantly surrounded by other frail folks from your very own generation, sharing very similar interests and totally compatible life experiences. But it was right at that highly intense moment when Derek suddenly unexpectedly arrived for a highly improvised, sudden business meeting, and my entire world completely changed forever. While the greedy men quickly retreated back into the private study to eagerly discuss massive construction deals, I quietly stayed behind in the massive living room. I was apparently deeply engrossed in reading a glossy magazine, but in absolute reality, my sharp brain was furiously processing every single detail of what I had just shockingly heard. It was during that tense, agonizing wait that Brittany actually committed the single greatest, most catastrophic mistake of her entire miserable life. She carelessly left her glowing, unlocked smartphone sitting right on the expensive glass coffee table while she quickly dashed to the lavish bathroom to obsessively retouch her heavy makeup. Suddenly, the bright screen aggressively lit up with a brand new text message notification. It was absolutely never my true intention to eagerly spy on anyone, but the shocking message was directly from her nasty sister, and the highly revealing first few lines were completely visible right there on the bright lock screen. Did you finally convince the horrible old witch to go lock herself up in the nursing home? Mom loudly says that the exact second she finally leaves, you guys will be able to completely remodel the entire house without her constantly being directly in your way. She also says that Dad is already super excited to completely take over the entire massive garage for all his silly projects. My blood instantly turned into solid ice. It was absolutely not just Alex and Brittany. It was her entire incredibly toxic, greedy family. Every single one of them fully knew about the evil master plan. Every single one of them was eagerly, desperately waiting for my permanent departure, as if it were some highly anticipated massive liberation. I silently stood up from the plush sofa and carefully crept over to the glowing phone. With violently trembling hands, I quickly swiped up to fully read the rest of the dark messages in the awful text conversation. What I eagerly read next absolutely shattered my very soul into tiny broken pieces, but at the exact same time, it instantly ignited a massive roaring flame of pure, unadulterated fury that I honestly had absolutely no idea still existed deep inside of me. The horrifying messages I read on Brittany's phone were exactly like sharp, painful daggers stabbed directly into my bleeding heart, but they were also like massive electrical shocks that violently awakened a sleeping giant inside me that had been dormant for way too long. With my hands violently shaking, I eagerly continued reading the awful text thread that completely exposed the true, deeply evil nature of their grand master plan. You honestly have absolutely no idea just how incredibly easy it was to manipulate her. Brittany had cruelly texted just 2 short days prior. The pathetic old hag is just so incredibly desperate to feel deeply loved that she instantly swallowed the entire fake story about the luxury retirement home. Alex flawlessly acted as if we were making a massive, painful financial sacrifice. But the brutal reality is that with the $5,000 we are going to pay them every single month, we will actually save way more money just by absolutely not having her nasty presence here every single Sunday, constantly eating all of our highly expensive food. Her sister's toxic reply was somehow even worse. Haha, you guys are literally so incredibly smart. Besides, once she is fully locked away in that place, it will be so incredibly easy for her to just gradually lose all contact with you guys. Those pathetic old people in those awful places get extremely depressed and quickly become totally antisocial. In less than a year, she probably will not even want you guys to come visit her anymore. But the final text message that truly knocked the wind right out of my lungs clearly read, "The absolute best part of all is that Dad already spoke to his shady lawyer friend. He confidently says that if you guys can somehow easily get her legally declared mentally incapacitated due to her old age, then after 6 short months, you can easily file for full legal guardianship over her. Then you can easily seize total control of whatever tiny, pathetic savings she still has left, even if it is only a few $1,000s. Every single little cent counts." My highly sharp brain furiously processed that horrific information as if a massive nuclear bomb had just exploded inside my head. They absolutely did not just want to throw me away. They actively planned to falsely declare me totally mentally incompetent, just to ruthlessly steal every last single penny of my supposedly tiny, pathetic life savings. The massive sick irony of it all was so incredibly brutal that it almost made me want to laugh totally hysterically. If those absolute fools only knew that my true actual net worth easily exceeded $15 million, they probably would have actively plotted my violent murder instead of just a simple, quiet nursing home internment. I quickly snatched my own phone and rapidly snapped highly clear photos of every single awful text message long before Brittany finally strutted back from the bathroom. My hands were absolutely no longer trembling in fear. They were now moving with the flawless, deadly surgical precision of someone who had finally discovered their ultimate true purpose in life. During the next 30 long minutes while they loudly continued their fake business meeting, I successfully mapped out the single most brilliant, highly elaborate, and totally devastating revenge strategy of my entire life. That very night, deeply hidden in the absolute privacy of my tiny, modest apartment, I aggressively began to plan my massive counterattack with the sheer cold meticulousness of a five-star general fiercely preparing for an all-out war. The very first vital thing I absolutely had to do was immediately contact my highly trusted personal lawyer, Marcus Vance. He was a deeply loyal 58-year-old man who had successfully managed all of my complex legal affairs for well over 2 decades. Marcus was one of the very few people on Earth who truly knew my massive financial situation. He had always deeply respected my firm decision to keep an incredibly low public profile. Victoria. He spoke to me over the secure phone line that very night, his deep voice heavy with intense, massive concern, right after I fully explained exactly what I had uncovered. This is infinitely more highly severe than we initially thought. If they truly try to falsely declare you totally mentally incompetent, they could easily create highly complicated, massive legal issues, especially if they happen to have corrupt accomplices deeply embedded inside the judicial system. We absolutely need to act incredibly fast and extremely smart. During the following frantic days, Marcus and I worked extremely closely together to rapidly build what he proudly called the absolute strongest, highly impenetrable legal safety net he had ever designed. First, we rapidly updated every single one of my complex wills and massive legal documents. We made it absolutely totally clear that I was in full perfect possession of all my sharp mental faculties. We explicitly stated that any future sudden attempt to falsely declare me incompetent would be entirely deemed totally fraudulent. Second, we perfectly organized every single piece of solid evidence regarding my massive true net worth into a flawless ironclad order that would be absolutely impossible for anyone to legally refute. We had the original property deeds for the massive luxury mansion where they lived, legally dated 15 years ago, and strictly registered exclusively under my very own name through my massive shell company, Pacific Investments, LLC. We gathered the clear titles for all 3 luxury Mercedes-Benz vehicles, perfectly proving they were originally purchased using direct wire transfers strictly from my very own private bank accounts. We pulled all the complex corporate documents, flawlessly proving that I secretly owned a full 80% of Carter Construction through an incredibly complex, highly secured chain of massive anonymous corporations and blind trusts. But the absolute most totally devastating evidence of all were the massive, detailed bank records. They clearly showed every single one of the massive monthly transfers of $10,000 that they had been greedily receiving for the past 8 long years. Absolutely all of that massive money came directly from my personal accounts. It was secretly funneled through several different financial institutions just so it would perfectly appear exactly as if it were coming from wealthy outside investors or massive government contracts. Marcus had truly been an absolute brilliant genius in successfully structuring this massive, complex operation. Victoria, he gently explained to me right as we carefully reviewed the massive stack of documents in his private secure office. What we successfully created here was a totally unique situation where you could finally observe the true, deeply authentic character of your family without massive piles of money artificially interfering with their true decisions. They have literally been living off your massive, incredible generosity for many long years. But since they absolutely did not know that the huge money was actually coming directly from you, their horrible, toxic actions flawlessly reflect exactly who they truly are when they foolishly believe they have absolutely nothing left to gain or lose from you. The crucial third step of my massive plan directly involved secretly hiring an elite private investigator named Arthur Hayes. He was a highly skilled 53-year-old former police detective who specifically specialized in massive family fraud cases. Arthur literally had the absolute perfect, totally forgettable appearance required to effortlessly blend into the background. He had average height, a completely normal build, and an incredibly plain face. but his highly sharp mind was exactly like a massive supercomputer, perfectly processing complex information. Mrs. Carter. He confidently told me during our very first highly discreet meeting in a quiet, dark downtown coffee shop. I have personally seen many terrible cases of severe family abuse throughout my long career, but this specific case has highly unique elements that honestly make it particularly fascinating. Your greedy son and your horrible daughter-in-law have actively built a totally fake, completely fabricated life, entirely funded by your massive wealth. Yet they have somehow actually started fully believing their own massive, silly lies regarding their supposed massive success. Arthur eagerly spent the next 2 highly intense weeks meticulously documenting the massive, highly disastrous reality of Alex and Brittany's totally fake financial situation. The devastating results were honestly even more deeply shocking than I ever possibly could have imagined. Without my massive secret monthly transfers of $10,000, they absolutely had totally zero real income. The supposedly massive, highly successful construction company was basically just a completely empty fake facade. It heavily depended entirely on the massive, lucrative contracts that I secretly funded strictly through my highly powerful corporate connections. Just take a good look at these awful financial records, Arthur grimly showed me during our highly anticipated second meeting. He slid a massive, thick folder full of highly damaging documents directly across the small table. Your supposed golden boy son actually has massive personal debts, easily totaling over $200,000 in totally maxed-out credit cards and massive high-interest bank loans. Your greedy daughter-in-law currently owes an additional $150,000 strictly for wildly expensive luxury shopping sprees and ridiculous cosmetic treatments. The massive mortgage on the giant mansion is actually a full 3 massive payments behind. They have absolutely only avoided totally devastating foreclosure, strictly because you have been secretly covering the massive gap payments directly through the anonymous trust fund. But the absolute most totally devastating piece of explosive information was directly about Derek, the supposed brilliant business partner. This complete fraud of a man, Arthur seriously continued, has absolutely zero real capital actually invested in the massive company. His supposed massive ownership stake is entirely totally fictitious. He basically just acts as a completely fake frontman for the massive projects. He greedily takes a 10% cut for his totally fake participation, and then Alex happily steals all the massive credit for all the supposed brilliant corporate successes. The highly delicate 4th step of my massive plan was definitely the absolute trickiest. I absolutely needed to secretly gather totally irrefutable, rock-solid audio evidence of their true, deeply evil intentions without ever accidentally alerting them to my massive, totally devastating discoveries. To perfectly achieve this, Marcus quickly helped me secure totally hidden high-tech recording devices. I very easily discreetly installed them inside the massive mansion during one of my highly awful Sunday visits. Since I essentially had totally free, completely unmonitored access to the entire giant house, and they foolishly considered me to be completely harmless and totally stupid. It was shockingly easy to quickly plant tiny, highly sensitive microphones directly inside the private study, the massive kitchen, and the main living room. During the next 2 incredibly tense weeks, those totally hidden devices actively captured horrific, deeply chilling conversations that flawlessly confirmed my absolute worst, most terrifying suspicions. Alex and Brittany were absolutely not just actively planning to forcefully lock me away in a horrible nursing home. They had already eagerly started making massive, highly illegal arrangements to quickly sell off my tiny apartment. They had totally forged my personal signature on highly illegal preliminary real estate documents. They were actively working hand in hand with a totally corrupt notary just to illegally speed up the highly fraudulent sale process. Once she is fully locked away in that depressing place, I clearly heard Alex coldly say, during a highly secretive phone call with someone who sounded exactly like a sleazy, corrupt lawyer, "We are going to absolutely need the massive legal incapacitation process to be as incredibly fast as humanly possible. We totally have completely fake medical reports flawlessly documenting her supposed rapid mental decline. We also have several totally willing witnesses highly ready to officially testify that she has been constantly acting totally irrational." The corrupt lawyer's greedy, cold response was equally, completely terrifying. "Mr. Carter, with the massive pile of totally fake documentation you have easily provided, I can absolutely guarantee you that in far less than 4 short months, you will have totally, complete, massive legal control over absolutely all of your senile mother's assets. The totally illegal legal procedure will cost you exactly $20,000 in cold, hard cash. But considering that you will easily pocket at least $100,000 from the rapid illegal sale of her tiny apartment, it is a highly profitable, massive investment. But the absolute final, totally devastating moment that permanently sealed their massive doom arrived when I clearly heard Brittany talking on her phone directly with her nasty sister. The pathetic, stupid old hag is just so incredibly excited to quickly move into the fancy luxury retirement home that she literally even thanked me for supposedly taking such incredibly good care of her. She has absolutely no idea that Sunset Gardens is basically just a massive high-end prison specifically meant for pathetic old people. They will aggressively medicate her heavily until she is nothing but a totally drooling zombie. In less than 6 short months, she honestly will not even be able to remember her very own name. It was finally time to strike. Mother's Day was literally only 5 short days away, and I had absolutely everything flawlessly prepared for the most totally satisfying, massively destructive performance of my entire life. Mother's Day finally dawned with a totally clear, bright blue sky that honestly seemed to cruelly mock the massive, incredibly destructive storm that was just about to violently explode. I excitedly woke up at exactly 5 in the morning. Absolutely not because I needed to, but strictly because the massive rush of pure adrenaline violently coursing through my veins had kept me totally wide awake for the vast majority of the long night. Today was the exact day that the pathetic, highly submissive Victoria would finally, permanently die. And the massive, powerful woman that I always truly should have been would finally be violently reborn. I carefully dressed with extremely special, meticulous care that morning. I specifically chose a highly elegant, deep wine red dress that I had very discreetly purchased the previous week. It was absolutely nothing overly flashy, but it was just elegant enough to actively send a highly powerful, subliminal message. I perfectly styled my hair in a highly simple yet totally flawless manner. I applied light, perfect makeup just to ensure I looked highly healthy and extremely alert. And for the very first time in many long years, I proudly wore the expensive, totally authentic pearl necklace that I had happily inherited from my own mother. It was the only single piece of massive luxury that I safely allowed myself to proudly wear in total public without ever raising their totally blind suspicions. Tucked safely inside my designer handbag was a massive, highly important golden envelope that directly contained the ultimate highly destructive destiny of my entire horrible family. Deep inside that envelope were perfect, totally irrefutable copies of all the massive legal documents flawlessly proving my totally true, massive financial identity. But much more importantly, it held something they would absolutely never ever expect. The massive, totally immediate cancellation contracts for absolutely all the luxurious services, massive properties, and huge financial benefits they had been so happily enjoying completely without knowing the total truth. I pulled up to the massive mansion at exactly 12 o'clock noon on the dot, exactly as we had previously agreed. Brittany had supposedly organized a highly special, massive lunch for Mother's Day. She had actively invited absolutely not only her greedy parents, Edward and Francis, but also Derek and his snobby wife, two other equally awful couples from their highly exclusive country club, and, highly surprisingly, an older gentleman whom I absolutely did not recognize at all. However, Alex rapidly introduced him to me as Dr. Reynolds, a highly renowned specialist in elite geriatrics. The very presence of the corrupt doctor flawlessly confirmed that my darkest suspicion was totally correct. They had actively planned to use this highly public family gathering to immediately initiate the massive, totally fraudulent process of officially declaring me entirely mentally incompetent. They probably truly expected me to accidentally say or do something highly erratic during the massive lunch that the totally corrupt doctor could instantly interpret as a massive, undeniable sign of severe cognitive decline. "Mom!" Alex loudly exclaimed with wildly exaggerated, highly fake joy that honestly bordered on the totally comical. "You look so incredibly beautiful today. That gorgeous red dress totally suits you perfectly, does it not?" Brittany. His absolutely pathetic acting truly deserved a massive, terrible amateur theater award. But absolutely all the wealthy guests politely smiled and happily nodded their heads as if they truly deeply believed in this massive, sickening farce of a highly loving family. Brittany quickly stepped forward to forcefully give me a highly tight, totally fake hug that literally lasted exactly 3 short seconds. Exactly just enough time for the guests' flashing smartphone cameras to perfectly capture the supposedly beautiful moment, but absolutely not nearly enough to show any genuine, real affection. "Oh, darling," she venomously whispered directly into my ear. "Today is going to be such an incredibly special day for you. We have so incredibly many massive surprises perfectly prepared." Her totally fake voice had that highly distinct, incredibly venomous quality that I totally knew so perfectly well, but it was heavily totally disguised under massive, thick layers of sickeningly fake sweetness. The massive dining room was flawlessly decorated with wildly expensive fresh floral arrangements, and the giant table was perfectly set with the absolute most expensive, highly elegant fine china in the entire house. They actually assigned me a highly prominent place sitting directly at the massive head of the table. It was a supposedly massive position of totally high honor that instantly immediately put my sharp mind on massive high alert. For many long months, they had totally relegated me to highly uncomfortable cheap folding chairs shoved deep into the dark corners. And now, totally suddenly, they were magically treating me exactly like the highly honored queen of the massive celebration. This incredibly sudden, massive courtesy clearly totally had a dark, deeply hidden purpose. The first highly tense 30 minutes slowly passed by in what genuinely appeared to be a totally normal, highly happy family celebration. The wealthy guests constantly loudly congratulated me for supposedly having such an incredibly wonderful and totally generous family. They constantly commented on just how incredibly lucky I was to officially have such an incredibly successful son and such a deeply dedicated, highly loving daughter-in-law. Derek loudly, obnoxiously talked extensively about Alex's supposedly massive, highly impressive corporate business achievements. Meanwhile, his snobby wife constantly praised Brittany's highly exquisite, extremely expensive taste in totally lavish home decoration. But I could totally clearly feel the massive, thick electrical tension hanging heavily in the very air. Brittany and Alex were constantly exchanging highly significant, deeply intense looks. It was exactly as if they were eagerly, desperately waiting for the absolute, perfect, totally flawless moment to perfectly execute the next massive phase of their totally evil master plan. Dr. Reynolds was constantly, totally discreetly observing my every single move. He was actively taking massive, highly detailed mental notes of my every single spoken word and my every single tiny action. It honestly felt exactly like totally being stuck on a massive, highly public stage, totally forced to flawlessly play the pathetic role of the totally naive, sweet grandmother, while the true, deeply evil villains secretly prepared for my massive, highly public execution. The exact highly anticipated moment they had been so eagerly waiting for finally arrived right during dessert. Brittany dramatically stood totally up from her expensive chair. She was tightly holding a wildly expensive crystal glass filled with imported champagne, and she wore a massive, blinding smile that literally could have easily illuminated an entire, massive sports stadium. "Dear beloved guests," she loudly announced with a highly theatrical, totally fake voice. "As you all completely know today, we are officially celebrating absolutely not just Mother's Day, but also the beautiful, highly exciting beginning of a totally brand new, massive chapter in the life of our deeply beloved Victoria." Absolutely all eyes immediately rapidly turned straight toward me, and I could practically fully feel the thick air in the massive dining room totally thicken into solid concrete. Alex rapidly joined his fake wife. He securely placed a highly protective, totally fake hand directly on my shoulder. It was a massive gesture that looked highly affectionate, but honestly felt exactly like the tight, totally inescapable grip of a cruel prison guard. As a deeply responsible, highly loving family. Alex heavily continued, his deep voice absolutely overflowing with massive, totally fake emotion. "We have finally made the highly difficult yet totally necessary decision to successfully help our sweet mother quickly move into a totally amazing place where she can finally receive the highly specialized, massive care she totally deserves at this exact stage of her long life. Sunset Gardens is a totally elite, high-class luxury residence where she will happily enjoy the wonderful company of lovely people her exactly own age, along with totally exclusive medical services available 24 hours a day." Loud, highly appreciative murmurs of total massive approval quickly filled the giant room. "What incredibly dedicated, highly amazing children," one of Brittany's snobby friends loudly, obnoxiously commented. "It is just so incredibly admirable to easily see how they happily sacrifice their totally own personal comfort simply to successfully guarantee the total well-being of their sweet mother." Dr. Reynolds gravely, totally solemnly nodded his head, exactly as if he were currently witnessing an incredible, highly massive act of pure, unadulterated filial heroism. But then Brittany finally completely dropped the massive, totally devastating bomb that they had been so eagerly, carefully preparing for many long weeks. And to successfully make this massive transition entirely easier for absolutely everyone, she dramatically declared, with massive, totally fake crocodile tears literally shining brightly in her cold eyes, "We have also made the totally painful, highly difficult decision to immediately sell the tiny, modest apartment where Mother Victoria has quietly lived for so incredibly many years. The massive money straight from that highly fast sale will easily cover a huge portion of the massive expenses for the luxury residence. That way she can happily live out her days totally comfortably without ever being a massive financial burden to absolutely anyone at all." It was at that totally exact, highly precise moment that I finally completely decided that I had successfully heard totally enough of this massive garbage. For 64 long years of my life, I had always totally permitted awful toxic people to make major, highly massive decisions strictly for me. I let them speak for me, define totally exactly who I truly was, and dictate exactly what I truly deserved. But on that exact massive day, completely in front of that massive audience of totally guilty accomplices and fake witnesses, I firmly, completely decided that it was highly finally time for them to personally meet the highly powerful, totally true Victoria. I slowly, highly deliberately stood completely up from my expensive chair. I totally felt absolutely every single gaze completely fixated directly on me with massive total expectation. Brittany and Alex were still massively smiling with that totally arrogant, highly sickening confidence of totally foolish people who honestly believe they are in complete absolute control of the entire massive situation. But right when I carefully took the massive, highly important golden envelope directly out of my expensive handbag and totally smoothly, softly placed it right on the massive crystal table, their massive fake smiles immediately began to totally rapidly vanish, exactly like thin steam in the freezing cold air. Before we happily continue with this incredibly emotional, highly touching celebration, I firmly said, in a voice totally, incredibly calm, my massive calmness completely, totally contrasted highly dramatically with the massive, total chaos I was just about to violently unleash. I firmly believe there are some massive, highly important things that absolutely all of you totally need to know, strictly about me. The totally massive silence that immediately followed was so incredibly, totally complete that you could easily totally hear the heavy wall clock loudly ticking all the way from the totally opposite side of the massive house. Brittany had totally visibly paled to a highly sickening total shade of white, and Alex was standing totally completely frozen, exactly as if he clearly highly sensed that something totally monumental and highly destructive was just about to totally happen. Alex, my deeply beloved, highly precious son. I heavily continued totally staring directly, piercingly into his terrified, wide eyes. I firmly believe it is totally high time that you finally completely explain a few highly interesting, massive things directly to absolutely all of these highly, totally present witnesses. For massive example, could you please totally clearly explain directly to your sweet wife exactly why the massive monthly allowance of $10,000 that both of you greedily receive is totally going to permanently vanish in the next 5 short minutes? Brittany's panicked eyes totally snapped completely wide open, exactly like massive dinner plates. And Derek literally almost totally choked to death on his wildly expensive imported wine. But I was honestly totally just getting massively started. You could also totally clearly explain directly to your highly beloved in-laws, Edward and Francis, exactly why the gorgeous, highly massive $2 million mansion, where they have totally been living so incredibly comfortably, is absolutely going to totally vanish directly from their lives long before this sweet dessert is totally over. The totally massive, highly destructive words violently flew directly out of my mouth, exactly like highly precise, totally deadly sniper bullets. Every single one was totally flawlessly designed to totally hit exactly where it would cause the totally, absolute, most massive, highly intense pain. And totally finally, I coldly added, heavily, highly savoring absolutely every single massive second of their totally rapidly growing massive panic. Could you please totally clearly explain directly to your supposed brilliant business partner, Derek, exactly why the massive corporate construction company that you honestly totally believe you built with your very own massive talent and incredibly hard work is absolutely going to totally die long before we even step out of this massive dining room? It was right exactly then that I fully, completely stood completely up. And the total, highly genuine, massive panic rapidly began to totally, completely spread across their horrified faces, exactly like a totally massive, highly contagious plague. The totally dead silence that immediately followed my highly massive, totally destructive words was so incredibly dense that it honestly felt totally solid. Alex's mouth was totally hanging wide open, exactly as if his massive brain had completely, totally stopped properly processing basic information. Meanwhile, Brittany had turned so incredibly totally pale that her totally massive layer of expensive foundation simply could not possibly hide the totally sickly gray color that her face had completely taken on. The totally shocked guests were rapidly, totally looking back and forth directly between us. They were totally unable to completely understand exactly what was totally happening, but they totally, instinctively, deeply felt that they were actively, totally witnessing something highly, completely historic. Mom, Alex finally totally pathetically stammered out, his shaky voice totally cracking, exactly like that of a terrified, totally panicked teenager. What exactly are you totally talking about? You totally do not have any money at all. We have literally totally been helping you survive for many long years. His panicked words totally tumbled out in highly broken, totally fragmented pieces. It was exactly as if his totally terrified brain actively refused to process the massive, highly terrifying possibility that his totally entire fake world was just about to completely, totally collapse. I deeply, totally smiled with a massive, highly chilling serenity that honestly totally surprised even my very own self, and I slowly, totally, flawlessly opened the massive golden envelope exactly as if I were happily unwrapping a highly anticipated birthday present. "Oh, my sweet, highly beloved son," I totally gently replied. "Please completely allow me to totally clearly show you exactly what I am totally talking about." I smoothly pulled out the totally first massive legal document and proudly slammed it directly on the massive crystal table, where absolutely everyone could totally clearly see it. This is the totally original, highly authentic deed to this gorgeous, highly expensive mansion. It was totally signed and legally registered completely in my very own personal name exactly 15 years ago, strictly through my massive corporate shell company, Pacific Investments, LLC. Derek had totally rapidly jumped up so violently that he totally knocked his expensive chair totally over. "That is absolutely, totally impossible," he loudly muttered. He aggressively moved closer to totally closely examine the massive legal document. His totally panicked eyes rapidly scanned the dark ink lines on the heavy paper, exactly as if he were desperately totally reading a highly complex foreign language. "Alex, you totally told me directly to my face that you bought this massive house with the huge money from your very first massive corporate construction contracts, because that is exactly what I totally believed," Alex completely whispered. His terrified voice was absolutely barely audible. He had quickly grabbed the massive legal document with violently shaking, terrified hands. He was totally examining it exactly as if he totally desperately expected the printed letters to completely magically change right before his panicked eyes. "Mom, this absolutely totally has to be some kind of massive legal mistake, some kind of huge, totally terrible legal confusion." But I was absolutely already rapidly pulling out the massive second set of highly damaging, total legal documents. Right here are the totally authentic titles to the 3 luxury Mercedes-Benz cars that absolutely all of you totally enjoy, driving so much, I loudly announced. I proudly, totally, smoothly slapped the heavy papers down one by one, directly onto the massive table, exactly like winning cards in a high-stakes poker game. The sleek silver one that Alex totally drives, bought with a massive direct wire transfer of $120,000 strictly from my very own personal account at Chase Bank. The bright red one for Brittany, $110,000 strictly from the exact same private account. And the black one that Edward and Francis drive, $95,000. Brittany had begun to tremble visibly. "No, no, no, this cannot be happening," she repeated like a mantra, frantically reviewing the documents. "You live in that horrible little apartment. You wear old clothes. Your car makes weird noises." Her voice was getting higher with every word bordering on hysteria. "Oh, yes. I said with a smile that probably seemed diabolical. "My little performance. Did you know that during all these years I have been living exactly the life I wanted you to see? My real home is in the financial district, a 3,000 square foot penthouse with a panoramic view of the city. My noisy car is a collector's edition Volkswagen that I keep precisely because I like its character, but I also have a BMW and a Lexus in my private garage." The guests had started to murmur among themselves, some taking out their phones to record what had clearly become the most spectacular family drama they had ever witnessed. Dr. Richards, who was supposedly there to evaluate my mental competence, was watching me with a mix of astonishment and professional admiration. But the final blow came when I pulled out the corporate documents for Sterling Construction. "And now the crown jewel," I announced, unfolding the papers. "David, my son's dear partner, I hope you have enjoyed these years pretending to be a successful businessman, because it turns out that 80% of the company you think you helped build has belonged to me since day one." David sank into his chair as if he had been physically struck. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice had lost all conviction. "The contracts, the clients, the initial capital, everything came from our contacts and our hard work." "It came from my contacts and my money," I corrected him firmly. "Every major contract you have secured in the last 8 years was arranged through my connections in the industry. The land for the Pinecrest residential complex, which generated $2.5 million in profit for you, was purchased by me through a trust. The capital for all the construction projects came out of my bank accounts, funneled through different institutions to look like external financing." Alex had stood up and was pacing around the table like a caged animal. But why did you lie to us all these years?" The question gave me the perfect opportunity for the most satisfying moment of this entire revelation. "Why did I lie to you?" I repeated, and for the first time in the conversation, I allowed real emotion to seep into my voice. "I did not lie to you, my dear son. You never asked me about my real situation. You assumed I was poor. You decided to treat me like a burden, and you built your entire relationship with me based on that assumption." Brittany had started to cry, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of pure terror for what this meant for her future. "Vivian, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can change. We can treat you better. You do not have to punish us like this." "Punish you?" I asked, genuinely surprised by her choice of words. "I am not punishing you, dear Brittany. I am simply withdrawing my financial support from people who have proven they do not deserve it." I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I had on speed dial. "Mark, yes, proceed with all the cancellations immediately." "What cancellations?" Alex asked, but his voice had taken on the desperate tone of someone who already knows the answer but refuses to accept it. "Well," I said, "first, the immediate cancellation of all the monthly transfers you have been receiving. Second, the eviction notice for this mansion with 30 days to vacate. Third, the revocation of all permissions to use the vehicles registered in my name." David had turned completely white. But the current construction contracts, we have commitments with clients. "The current contracts will be transferred to the new management of the company," I replied calmly. "I have decided to put real professionals in charge, not people who believe their own lies about their business talent." I addressed him directly. "Your involvement in Sterling Construction ends today, David. I hope you saved some of the 10% commission I have been paying you all these years." But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. I took out my phone again and played one of the recordings I had captured in previous weeks. Brittany's voice filled the dining room. "The stupid old woman is so excited to move to the luxury residence that she even thanked me for taking such good care of her. She has no idea that Sunset Meadows is basically a prison for old people, where they will medicate her until she is a zombie." The silence that followed was absolute. The guests looked at us in horror, finally understanding the true nature of what they had been witnessing. Francis and Edward looked completely shattered, as if they had just realized their daughter was a sociopath. I also have recordings of all your conversations about declaring me mentally incompetent. I continued watching the panic spread across their faces like an oil stain. The consultations with corrupt lawyers, the plans to falsify medical reports, even the arrangements to sell my apartment without my knowledge using forged documents. Alex had sunk heavily into his chair, his head in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I am sorry. We did not know. If we had known the truth, we would have acted differently." "I am going to stop you right there," I said. "Do you really think the problem here was that you did not know I had money? The problem was not that you were planning to drug me in a nursing home, steal my small savings, and throw me away like garbage." My voice had turned as cold as steel. "No, Alex. The problem is exactly who you are as people." And that was when they finally realized that not only had they lost all their money and properties, but they had done so in front of witnesses who now knew their true intentions. Their social reputation, their status, their future. Everything had crumbled in the space of 30 minutes. The empire of lies they had built had turned to ashes, and I was the woman who had lit the match. As the guests left the mansion in an uncomfortable silence, I was left alone with what remained of my family. Brittany, pale and trembling, had collapsed on the sofa, while Alex looked out the window with a blank expression. Edward and Francis, sitting in a corner, looked like they had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. "You have 30 days to vacate this house," I said calmly. "Starting tomorrow, a security company will supervise to ensure you do not take anything that does not belong to you. You can keep your personal effects and your clothes. Everything else, furniture, appliances, artwork, will stay here." "Where are we supposed to go?" Brittany asked with a broken voice. "That is no longer my concern, my dear," I replied. "You have exactly the same amount of resources you thought I had when you were planning to send me to Sunset Meadows. It will be interesting to see how you manage." I turned to Alex, who was still looking out the window as if hoping the outside world would offer him some answer. "As for you, my son, I have arranged for you to receive a severance of $2,000 a month for 6 months. It is exactly 4 times what you considered enough for my survival. You should be grateful for my generosity. And after 6 months," he finally asked, his voice barely a murmur, "after 6 months you will have to do what you have never done before. Earn a living through your own hard work." I walked over to him, looking him straight in the eyes. "Alex, I am not punishing you. I am setting you free. I am giving you the chance to discover who you really are without the shield of my money, without the illusion of success that I built for you. Maybe you will find some dignity in that process." I picked up my purse and headed toward the door. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. "By the way, I have hired Emily Martin as the new CEO of Sterling Construction. She is a civil engineer with an MBA and 20 years of experience, the kind of professional the company always deserved. If you ever decide to actually learn the business, maybe she will consider offering you an entry-level position. You would have to start from the bottom, just like you should have done years ago." The expression on their faces as I closed the door behind me was something I would keep in my memory forever. It was not satisfaction that I felt, but a strange mix of liberation and sadness. It felt as if I had finally dropped a weight I had been carrying for decades, but at the same time I regretted that it had been necessary to go to this extreme. When I arrived at my real home, the penthouse on Park Avenue, I took off my shoes and stepped out onto the terrace. The late afternoon sun bathed New York City in a golden glow, and for the first time in years, I took a deep breath, feeling that the air was purer, cleaner. Mark was waiting for me in the living room with a glass of red wine. His expression was a mix of concern and admiration. "How did it go?" he asked, although he already knew the answer from the look in my eyes. "Exactly as we planned," I replied, accepting the glass he offered me. "The truth has been set free, and with it, so have I." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the city lights begin to turn on as twilight descended over New York. "You know, Mark," I said, "for years I wondered if I was doing the right thing by keeping up this double life. I questioned if it was not just a form of manipulation." I took a sip of the wine, savoring its complexity. But today, I understood that I was not manipulating them. I was giving them the opportunity to show who they really were when they thought there was nothing to gain. Mark nodded thoughtfully. The true nature of people is rarely revealed when there is wealth or power in sight. It is in the apparent absence of these that we see who they really are. "What hurts me," I continued, "is not what they did, but that they never saw me. The woman I am, the mother I tried to be, became invisible due to their greed and prejudices." I took another sip of wine. "They saw me as old, poor, and insignificant, and they based their entire relationship with me on those assumptions." "What will you do now?" Mark asked after a moment. I smiled, looking out toward the New York skyline. "Now, my dear friend, I am going to live. Truly live for the first time in a long time, without masks, without pretenses, just being Vivian Sterling." The next day, just as I had promised, a security team arrived at the mansion to supervise the eviction process. Arthur Miller was in charge, making sure everything was meticulously documented. He sent me daily reports on the progress. Apparently, Brittany had suffered a nervous breakdown and had been sedated by Dr. Richards, the very same doctor they had brought to evaluate me. The irony was not lost on any of us. Alex, according to Arthur, looked like a man who had aged a decade in one day. He moved around the house like a ghost, mechanically gathering his belongings. Edward and Frances had contacted other relatives in Florida, arranging to stay with them temporarily. A week after Mother's Day, I received the first of many letters Alex would send me over the following months. I opened it with some apprehension, expecting recriminations or desperate pleas. Instead, I found something I did not expect: the beginning of honesty. "Dear Mom, I do not even know where to begin. The words, 'I am sorry,' seem insufficient for the magnitude of what we have done. I am not going to look for excuses or justifications. What we did, what we planned to do, was unforgivable. I want you to know that Brittany and I have separated. She has gone to live with her parents in Florida. I have rented a small apartment in Queens, and I am trying to understand how I ended up becoming the person who could plan something so cruel against his own mother. I have started therapy. The psychologist says I have a long road ahead of me to understand my behavioral patterns and my obsession with status and appearances. I am not asking for your forgiveness because I know I do not deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to face the consequences of my actions and perhaps someday find a way to make up for even a fraction of the damage I have caused you. With sincere regret, Alex." I folded the letter slowly and put it in a drawer of my desk. I felt no triumph or satisfaction, but rather a strange mix of sadness and hope. Maybe something good could come out of all this pain. 3 weeks after Mother's Day, the mansion had been completely vacated. I decided not to sell it immediately, but instead to turn it into the headquarters for a foundation I had in mind. Because if there was one thing I had learned from this whole experience, it was that there were many other Vivians out there. Older women who were made invisible, belittled, or manipulated by their own families. Emily Martin, the new CEO of Sterling Construction, turned out to be exactly the professional the company needed. In just 3 weeks, she had completely reorganized the structure, implemented new quality systems, and secured contracts that doubled the projected revenue. Mrs. Sterling, She informed me during our first monthly meeting. The clients are amazed by the difference. Before, projects were constantly delayed, there were communication problems, and the quality of work was inconsistent. Now we deliver on time, within budget, and with standards that exceed expectations. Her professionalism and dedication confirmed that I had made the right decision in removing the previous managers. For the first time in years, Sterling Construction was operating as the company my late husband and I had dreamed of. But perhaps the most significant change was within myself. I no longer dressed to look invisible. I no longer shrank away at social gatherings. I no longer felt the need to apologize for taking up space in the world. I started attending yoga classes at an exclusive studio near my penthouse. There, I met a group of professional women my age who became genuine friends. There were retired doctors, former executives of multinational corporations, successful artists, and businesswomen who, like me, had built significant fortunes but preferred to keep a low profile. What I admire most about your story, Samantha, a 62-year-old former marketing director, told me during one of our monthly dinners, is that you did not seek revenge for revenge's sake. You sought justice, and the difference is huge. These women understood the unique challenges of being successful in a society that often underestimates the power of older women. But perhaps the project that gave me the greatest satisfaction was the creation of the Invisible Women Foundation. With Mark's help, I established an organization dedicated to helping older women who had been victims of family financial abuse. We worked with specialized lawyers, psychologists, and social workers to identify cases similar to mine and provide free legal and emotional resources. The number of cases we are uncovering is alarming. The Foundation's executive director, a social worker named Isabel Quinn, explained to me, there are thousands of women being financially manipulated by their own families, but they do not have the resources or the information necessary to defend themselves. Our program had already helped more than 50 women in situations similar to mine. One of our first beneficiaries was a 70-year-old woman named Eliza, whose daughter had been stealing her pension for 5 years, while convincing her she was too old to manage her own finances. With our legal help, she not only got her money back, but also filed criminal charges against her daughter for elder fraud. Mrs. Vivian. Eliza told me during our last meeting with tears of gratitude in her eyes, "You gave me back not just my money, but my dignity. For the first time in years, I feel like a person who deserves respect." These moments reminded me why it had been worth it to expose my own family situation. My new life also included simple pleasures I had forgotten existed. I could go to the grocery store and buy exactly what I wanted, not just the cheapest thing available. I could give generously to charities without having to pretend that every dollar was a sacrifice. I could travel when I wanted, eat at fancy restaurants, and buy books without looking at the prices. And most importantly, I could do all this without having to justify my decisions to anyone. Public recognition came unexpectedly when an investigative journalist from the New York Times heard about my story through the legal proceedings related to Alex and Brittany's case. The article she wrote about the invisible multimillionaire who exposed family abuse went viral on social media. It turned me into a sort of symbol for older women who had been underestimated or abused. "Your story represents something bigger," the journalist told me during the interview. "It represents the power that women have to rewrite our own narratives regardless of our age." The article generated hundreds of letters from women sharing similar experiences, many of which became cases for our foundation. But above all, my new life had taught me that true wealth is not in money, but in living authentically and being treated with the respect we deserve. 6 months after that Mother's Day lunch that changed my life, I received a call I was not expecting. It was Alex, my son, who had spent the last few months living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, working as an insurance salesman for a small company. His voice sounded different on the phone, more humble, stripped of the arrogance that had characterized our conversations for years. "Mom," he said after a long, awkward silence, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I would like to see you just to talk, just to truly apologize. His voice cracked slightly at the end, and for the first time in decades, I could hear the boy he had been before he became the man who betrayed me. I agreed to see him not because I had completely forgiven him for what he did, but because I had learned that forgiveness is primarily a gift we give ourselves, not to those who have hurt us. What impact did my story have on you? Have you ever experienced something similar? Comment below. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the Upper East Side, a neutral and public place where we both could feel safe to express what we needed to say. When I arrived, I barely recognized my own son. The impeccably dressed man who always flaunted his designer suits had been replaced by someone who looked tired. He was wearing simple but clean clothes with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He stood up when he saw me walk in a gesture of respect he had not shown me in years. "Mom" was the first thing he said, and then he stopped, as if all the words he had rehearsed had evaporated from his mind. I do not even know where to start. What we did to you, what I did to you, has no justification. There are no excuses that can explain how we came to plan something so cruel. I sat across from him and studied his face, looking for signs of genuine sincerity versus calculated manipulation. What I saw was a broken man, but not necessarily one who was sorry for the right reasons. "Alex," I said softly, "tell me something. If I truly had been the poor woman you thought I was, would you still feel that what you planned was wrong?" The question took him by surprise. I could see his brain working to find the right answer, but he finally decided to be honest. "We probably would have justified our actions by telling ourselves it was for your own good," he admitted, looking down. "We would have said you were too old to take care of yourself, that the nursing home was really better for you, that selling your apartment was the smartest financial decision." "Exactly," I replied, and for the first time since this conversation began, I smiled slightly. "The problem was never that you did not know I had money. The problem, Alex, is that you decided my opinion, my wishes, and my autonomy as a human being did not matter. You treated me like an object you could move from one place to another for your convenience." Alex nodded, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "You are right. You are completely right. And I do not know how to live with that now that I understand it." He told me how the last few months had been the hardest of his life, not just financially, but emotionally. Brittany had left him barely a week after the meltdown, taking what little they had left and moving back in with her parents in Florida. "She blames me for everything," he explained. "She says if I had handled the situation with you better, none of this would have happened. But I know she was just as cruel, just as manipulative. We both were." His words confirmed something I already knew. Even in adversity, some people do not truly learn from their mistakes. They just look for someone else to blame for the consequences. I told him about my new life, my projects, and the foundation I had created to help other women in similar situations. I saw his eyes widen as he realized the magnitude of what he had truly lost. Not just money and properties, but the chance to know his real mother, to have an authentic relationship with me. "Is there any chance we can rebuild our relationship?" He finally asked, his voice small and hopeful. "I am not asking for money. I am not asking you to give me anything back. I just want to know if there is a chance that someday you could forgive me." The answer I gave him was one I had been formulating through months of reflection and personal therapy. "Alex, I have already forgiven you. Because forgiveness freed me from the weight of resentment. But forgiveness does not mean automatic reconciliation. Trust is built with consistent actions over time, not with apologies in a coffee shop." I explained to him that if he really wanted to rebuild our relationship, he would have to show that he had fundamentally changed as a person, not just that he had learned to regret the consequences of his actions. That means working on yourself in therapy, understanding why you were capable of planning something so cruel against your own mother, It means becoming the kind of man who would do the right thing even when no one is watching. We said goodbye that afternoon with a tentative hug, the first genuine one we had shared in years. I promised nothing, but I did not completely close the door either. Time and actions would tell if there was hope for us as a family. The next day, while enjoying my morning coffee on the terrace of my penthouse, I reflected on everything that had changed in my life in just 6 months. The contrast could not be starker. My morning routine had evolved to reflect this new confidence. After my coffee session and reading the financial news, I would spend an hour in my private gym. Not because I needed to stay in shape to impress anyone, but because it made me feel strong and vital. Then I would carefully choose my clothes for the day, not to hide myself, but to express exactly who I was. A successful, intelligent woman, completely in control of her life. Weekends were dedicated to exploring passions I had postponed for years. I took oil painting classes at an adult workshop where I discovered I had a natural talent for landscapes. I joined a book club that focused on biographies of historical businesswomen. I even started taking tango lessons, not because I had a partner, but because I had always wanted to learn and finally had the confidence to do it. The Invisible Women Foundation had become the center of my days. In just 6 months, we had helped over 200 women regain their financial and emotional autonomy. Every success story reminded me why this whole journey, as painful as it had been, was worth it. That morning, I had an important meeting. Emily Martin, the CEO of Sterling Construction, was coming to present the results of the first half of the year under her leadership. When she arrived, her professional and confident attitude confirmed to me once again that I had made the right decision. "Mrs. Sterling, the results have exceeded our most optimistic expectations," she announced, unfolding charts and tables on my dining room table. "Not only have we won back all the clients who were dissatisfied, but we have secured 3 major new projects that will double our revenue next year." "And what about the employees?" I asked, remembering how Alex and David had treated the staff like mere disposable instruments. "Morale has improved significantly," she replied with a smile. "We implemented a new bonus system based on actual performance, not on personal connections or favoritism. We have established a continuous training program, and for the first time, we have a clear career path for each team member. Staff turnover has dropped from 45% to 7% in just 6 months." I nodded, pleased, but not surprised. Authentic leadership always pays off, while leadership based on appearances and deceit inevitably collapses. "There is something else you should know," Emily added, a hint of caution in her voice. "I received an interesting job application last week. Your son Alex has requested an interview for a project assistant position." My eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "Project assistant is an entry-level position." "Exactly," Emily confirmed. "He did not mention his relationship with you, nor did he reference his former position in the company. He simply sent an honest resume mentioning his recent experience in insurance sales and expressing an interest in learning the business from the ground up." A small flame of hope ignited in my heart. Maybe Alex was truly trying to change. "What are you planning to do?" I asked, curious about her approach as a leader. "If it is entirely up to me, I will give him the interview and evaluate him like any other candidate. No favoritism, but also no prejudice. Does that sound okay to you?" I smiled, appreciating her integrity. "That sounds perfect to me, Emily. I trust your judgment completely." That afternoon, I received a call from Mark, my lawyer. New complications had arisen in David's case. Apparently, during his time as Alex's partner, he had embezzled additional funds that we had not initially detected. "Vivian, we have discovered suspicious transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands," Mark explained in a serious tone. "Approximately $250,000 over the last 3 years. Small, regular amounts that went unnoticed in routine audits. Have you been able to trace the money?" "To a certain extent. It seems David was building himself an escape plan. He bought a small villa on a beach in the Bahamas and has been accumulating a fund to live comfortably if things ever got complicated in the States." I sighed, not surprised but disappointed. "What are our options?" We can file criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. With the evidence we have, there is a solid case. Or we can reach an out-of-court settlement where he returns the funds plus interest and avoids the criminal process. I thought for a moment. What do you recommend? Frankly, Vivian, I think the criminal process would serve as a clear message to anyone who tries something similar in the future. Besides, there is a component of public justice that we should not ignore. I nodded, making my decision. Proceed with the charges, Mark. It is not about revenge, but about accountability. David must face the consequences of his actions just like everyone else. That same week, I received surprising news about Brittany. Arthur Miller, who had kept a discreet watch on my ex-daughter-in-law's movements, informed me that she had started working as a sales clerk at a clothing store in Florida. It is a small but elegant boutique downtown, Arthur explained. Apparently, after her parents refused to support her indefinitely, she was forced to look for a job. According to my sources, it is the first time in her adult life that she has worked. I could not help but smile wryly. The woman who had spent years looking at me with disdain for my supposed poverty was now experiencing firsthand what it meant to earn a living. How does she seem to be handling it? I asked, genuinely curious. Surprisingly well, according to the reports. Her boss says she has an excellent eye for fashion and has boosted sales with her styling recommendations. Apparently, years of obsessing over expensive clothes are finally paying off in a productive way. This news prompted a deep reflection. Perhaps adversity really could transform people, even in unexpected ways. One Saturday morning, while I was painting on my terrace, I received an unexpected visit. Isabel Quinn, the director of the Invisible Women Foundation, had come over urgently. Vivian, I am sorry for dropping by unannounced, but we have a case that I think will interest you personally. Your son just walked into the apartment. Of course, sit down. Would you like some coffee? While I prepared the drinks, Isabel explained the situation. We have received a request for help from a 72-year-old woman named Carol Davis. She says her son has been stealing her pension and sold her house without her consent. The son's name is David Davis. I stopped dead in my tracks, the coffee mug halfway to the table. David, our David. Isabel nodded gravely. The very same. Apparently, before partnering with your son, he already had practice financially manipulating his own mother. The poor woman is currently living in a rented room in the Bronx, surviving on what little she has left after David took almost all her savings. The irony was almost poetic. The man who had collaborated in the scheme to strip me of my assets had been doing exactly the same thing to his own mother for years. Bring her to the foundation immediately, I decided. We will provide her with full legal representation and emergency financial assistance, and I would like to meet her personally. 2 days later, I met Carol Davis at the foundation's offices. She was a small but dignified woman with intelligent eyes that had seen too much suffering. Her story was painfully similar to so many others we had heard, but with a particularly bitter twist given my personal history with her son. David was always a charming boy, she explained with a trembling voice. He could talk anyone into anything. When his father died 10 years ago, he assured me he would take care of everything. Little by little, he started taking control of my bank accounts, my documents, until one day he told me we had to sell the house because it was too expensive to maintain. He promised we would buy something smaller and save the rest for my old age. But that did not happen, I finished gently. Carol shook her head, tears in her eyes. The money just disappeared. There was always an explanation. Temporary investments, unexpected expenses, banking problems. When I finally demanded clear answers, he told me I was an ungrateful old woman who did not appreciate everything he did for me, that I should be thankful he had not thrown me out on the street. The story was painfully familiar to me. The same patterns, the same tactics, the same calculated cruelty. Carol, I said, taking her hands in mine, I want you to know that you are not alone. Our foundation will help you with everything you need, but there is something else you should know. Your son also participated in a similar scheme against me, and he is now facing charges for fraud and embezzlement." Her eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a strange mix of pain and relief. "So I am not the only one. It was not my fault." "No, you are not the only one, and it was definitely not your fault. Your son has been exploiting the trust and love of the people close to him for years." That night, after making sure Carol was settled in a temporary apartment provided by the foundation, I reflected on the strange twists of fate. Somehow, the universe had connected our stories in a cycle of poetic justice. The next day, I received a call I was not expecting. It was Emily Martin. "Vivian, we conducted the interview with Alex." She reported in a professional tone. I must say, I was pleasantly surprised. "He came prepared. He had researched our current projects, and he showed a basic but solid understanding of the fundamentals of the business. When I asked him why he wanted to start from the bottom at a company where he once held a management position, his answer was remarkable." "What did he say?" I asked, genuinely curious. "He said, and I quote, 'I never really learned this business. I held a position I was not qualified for and took credit for the work of others. I want to earn my place legitimately this time. To learn from the basics and someday be able to feel genuine pride in my achievements, not in an illusion.'" A wave of unexpected emotions washed over me. Pride, hope, and a pinch of melancholy for all the lost years. "And what was your decision?" I asked, remaining neutral. "Did you offer him the job?" "I did," Emily replied without hesitation. "He will start on Monday as a project assistant on the renovation of the Bronx Cultural Center. It is a small but important project, and he will be under the direct supervision of one of our most experienced and demanding managers. He will get no special treatment, and if he does not meet the standards, he will be fired just like any other employee." "That sounds perfect," I said, feeling a strange mix of emotions. "Thank you, Emily, for giving him this opportunity. I am not doing it for you or for him," she clarified professionally. "I am doing it because I believe in second chances when they are deserved, and because he seems sincerely willing to learn and contribute." Time passed with surprising speed. Before I knew it, a full year had gone by since that fateful Mother's Day that had changed our lives forever. The Invisible Women Foundation had grown exponentially. We now had offices in New York, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles, and we had helped over 500 women regain their financial and emotional autonomy. Carol Davis's case had become one of our biggest successes. Not only did she recover a large part of her money thanks to the legal proceedings against David, but she was now working as a volunteer at the foundation, sharing her experience with other women in similar situations. David had been sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and elder financial abuse. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Sterling Construction was thriving under Emily's leadership. The company had doubled in size, but more importantly, it had established a reputation for integrity and quality that made us all proud. And as for Alex, his transformation had been perhaps the biggest surprise of all. During the last 12 months, I had discreetly observed his progress in the company through Emily's reports. He started as the lowliest assistant doing basic tasks and learning every aspect of the business from scratch. At first, some employees who remembered him from his previous time treated him with suspicion, but he gradually earned their respect through hard work and genuine humility. He never asked for favors, never mentioned his relationship with me, and never complained about the long hours or the difficult tasks. He simply worked, learned, and constantly improved. After 6 months, he was promoted to Junior Project Coordinator, a promotion that Emily said he had earned on his own merit. And 3 months later, when a critical problem arose in a major project, and Alex proposed an innovative solution that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, he was publicly recognized for his contribution. We kept limited contact during this time. An occasional coffee, a few phone calls, always. in a cordial but cautious tone. He never asked me for money or professional help. He never tried to leverage our relationship to advance in the company. He just told me about his therapy, his challenges, and his small achievements. On the anniversary of that Mother's Day, I received a letter from Alex. It did not come in a normal envelope, but in a gold one, a deliberate echo of the one I had used to reveal the truth a year earlier. Inside, I found not just a letter, but several documents. Dear Mom, it has been a year since the day you exposed the truth and changed our lives forever. At the time, I saw it as the end of my world. Now I see it as the beginning of my real life. During this year, I have learned more about myself, about the value of honest work, and about the true meaning of success than in my entire previous life. My therapist says I spent decades trying to build a facade of success because deep down I always felt inadequate, always fearing I would not measure up to Dad's legacy. Instead of facing those feelings and working genuinely to earn my place, I chose the easy path, to pretend to manipulate to build a life based on appearances. And in that process, I hurt the person who loved me the most. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness is something I must earn through consistent actions over time, not with words on a page. I am writing to share some concrete steps I have taken on my path toward redemption. First, I have been working with a pro bono lawyer for other cases, similar to yours, helping to identify patterns of family financial abuse and developing protection strategies. My experience as the villain in this story gives me a unique perspective to detect manipulative tactics. Second, I have started a support group for men who, like me, have abused their family's trust and are now looking to change. We meet weekly to hold each other accountable and work on our underlying issues of insecurity and narcissism. Third, attached to this letter, you will find documents certifying that I have donated 30% of my monthly salary to the Invisible Women Foundation under strict anonymity. I am not looking for recognition or gratitude. I simply want to support the important work you do. Finally, I have started writing a book titled Confessions of a Family Financial Manipulator. Not for personal gain, all potential proceeds will go to the foundation, but to expose the tactics people like me use and help potential victims recognize them. I do not know if our relationship will ever fully heal. I do not know if you will ever trust me again. And honestly, I cannot blame you if you decide it is too late. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us, the lesson you taught me has not been in vain. You showed me that true wealth is not in possessions or appearances, but in integrity, authenticity, and mutual respect. And for that painful but necessary lesson, I will be eternally grateful. With love and sincere remorse, Alex. Tears rolled down my cheeks when I finished reading. They were not tears of sadness, but of a complex mix of emotions, relief, hope, and cautious optimism. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Isabel Quinn. Vivian, we have a special situation. A 68-year-old woman just arrived at the foundation in a state of great distress. Her son and daughter-in-law are trying to declare her incompetent to take control of her property on the coast. The story sounds very similar to yours, but there is a key difference. She is actually showing signs of early cognitive decline. She needs our protection, but she also needs genuine assistance. It is a delicate case that requires balancing autonomy with real care. I am on my way, I replied, wiping my tears and grabbing my purse. As I drove to the foundation, I reflected on how life presents us with challenges that initially seem devastating, but which often contain the seeds of a greater purpose. A year ago, I had been so focused on my personal revenge that I could not see beyond exposing my family's betrayal. Now I understood that that painful experience had led me to a much greater purpose: to help other women to change a system that allowed such abuses, and perhaps even to rebuild a more authentic family relationship from the ashes of falsehood. Upon arriving at the foundation, I found an older woman sitting in the waiting room with the same expression of fear and confusion I'd seen so many times. I sat next to her, took her hand in mine, and said the words I knew she needed to hear. You are not alone. We are listening to you, and together we will find a solution that protects both your dignity and your well-being. Her eyes clouded by age, but still bright with intelligence filled with tears of relief. At that moment, I felt that the circle was complete. That night, in the quiet of my penthouse, while I watched the lights of New York from my terrace, I called Alex. I read your letter. I said simply when he answered. There was a moment of silence, then his voice cautious but hopeful. And I would like to invite you to dinner on Sunday, not at the penthouse, but at the Foundation's headquarters. There is someone I want you to meet, a new case that just came in. I think your perspective could be valuable. My perspective? As an ex-villain? He asked with a flash of self-deprecating humor in his voice. As someone who has walked the entire path from the other side, I corrected him. As someone who understands the underlying motivations and has found a path toward redemption. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice sounded thicker, as if holding back barely controlled emotions. I will be there, Mom. Thank you for the opportunity. Hanging up, I looked out at the New York skyline where the city lights shined like earthly stars. I thought of all the invisible women out there, their stories yet untold, their voices yet unheard, and of all the people like my son trapped in cycles of deceit that damaged both others and themselves. True wealth, I understood, was not in the millions I had accumulated or in the properties I owned. It was in this new freedom to be authentically myself, in the ability to turn my pain into purpose, and in the possibility, however faint, that even the most damaged relationships could be transformed into something genuine. The invisible fortune I had discovered was worth more than all the dollars in my bank accounts. It was the fortune of authenticity, dignity, and the positive impact I could have on the world. And as the night embraced New York, I felt a peace I had not known in decades. It was not the happy ending of a fairy tale. It was something better, a real beginning with all its complexities, challenges, and promises. On that terrace under the starry American sky, the true Vivian Sterling finally felt completely at home. Not just in her luxury penthouse, but inside her own skin. Perhaps the most valuable lesson I had learned in this whole process was that it is never too late to reclaim our power, our voice, our true identity, and that sometimes the path to authenticity requires walking through the valley of the most painful truth. At 64 years old, when many assume that life is already set in stone, I was proving that we can reinvent ourselves completely if we have the courage to be authentic. The best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt us, but to build something so magnificent, so powerful, so genuinely ours, that their betrayal becomes a mere footnote in the great story of our lives. The sweetest success is to live so fully that those who once underestimated us realize everything they lost when they chose not to value us. Today, I am richer than ever, not just in financial terms, but in self-respect, authentic relationships, and the deep peace that comes from living completely aligned with who I truly am. And that more than any number in a bank account is the real treasure I found when I stopped hiding in the shadows of my own life. What part of my story impacted you the most? Have you ever experienced similar situations? Comment below and do not forget to like if you believe more women need to hear this message that it is never too late to reclaim our power.